Don't problem. The Shabbos is based on the weather. The union of Aaron is not so much. Why Hashem said to him, "Shall chad veil Mishal." So the Chayr is like, all union is not. Right? We're live already? Oh, we are?
I have to think about it. Okay. Okay, so first of all, this morning's breakfast is being sponsored. Let me just get the nusach right. By the Kemesh Chavra, as a thank you Hashem, and Mazel to Mr. and Mrs. Ruvain and Chani Moskowitz with a baby girl. They should be zeicha. Have a lot of nachas from her, and from the rest of the children, all Kilo, all Kais, you'll only see Semcha and Nachas and Bracha ad believe die. All right, so continuing from last week a little bit. So the Indian vice Indian. So we were in Sefer Yehoshua. We were talking about the sugya, the story of the kavan that was made by Har Grizim and Har Evel. And so we saw, again, just to get back into the swing of things, what we saw was that was an Indian of the Jewish people sort of accepting upon themselves the responsibility and the shlichus of being what's called an Or L'Goyim, a light to the nations, of influencing the nations of the world. Not to necessarily be Megayer them, but as Goyim, that they should keep Shav Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach, and they should be connected to Amunas Yisrael, and so on. So we use that as sort of a launching pad. We'll talk about the Indian of the Shav Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach, what the pneumistic obligation is by the Goyim, and in a larger sense, what exactly is their purpose in the world? How do we where are they placed in the bigger picture of the Tachlis Habriya? That's what we started with last week. Now, just to remind ourselves a little bit of what we spoke about last week, some of the basic questions. What we saw last week was a number of interesting points in the Rambam. What we saw is like this. We saw from the Rambam that despite the fact that every guy already from just being born, they're obligated in Shav Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach, that we saw from the Rambam. Nevertheless, the Rambam was machadish, or this is how he interpreted from Chazal, that there is a madrega that's called a ger taishav. So you have an average guy, which is chayiv in Shav Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach, certainly, and then you have obviously a person that's megayer and he's a full-fledged Jew. But you do have this middle madrega that's called a ger taishav. What's a ger taishav? A ger taishav is a guy that comes to a bezin of the Jewish people and accepts upon himself to keep the Shav Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach, which he already is obligated in. But he accepts to keep them because, and with the following addition or the following framework, that I accept upon myself to keep the Shav Mitzvahs that the Rabbeinu Shloim told Noyach and Adam and so on that the Goyim have to keep. But I believe in that tradition that Noach was told that, and these are my obligations, because that's what it says in the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. So I'm keeping the Shav Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach as they're commanded to Noach, but my belief in that tradition is because that's what Moshe Rabbeinu said in Har Sinai, that the Goyim have these mitzvahs as was told to Noach. And when a guy accepts upon himself those Shav Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach by accepting that tradition because it was told by Moshe, that's called a ger taishav. Said the Rambam, and because of that, once a guy becomes a ger taishav, then when he keeps Shav Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach, he now is a chelik in Olam Haba. That's what we saw from the Rambam. And so the kids are one of the basic questions that we were dealing with, that at least we started to deal with last week, was that what is this Inyan? I mean, Memanav Shach, he's keeping them, the guy's keeping them ultimately because this was the commandments that were given to Adam and Noach and to all the Goyim. He's not keeping them because it says in Chumash to do these things. But but the tradition, the belief that he has in connecting himself to the Nevuah of Noach and so on is because that's what Moshe said. So what's this in between Madreg? I mean, like he's keeping it because of Noach, or he's becoming a Yid? He's not. He's somewhere between a ger taishav. So what is this inyan of the Shav Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach being accepted through the lens of Moshe Rabbeinu? And also another question we saw was that the Rambam says again a ger taishav has a chelik in Olam Haba by keeping Shav Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach. The problem was that we saw the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva says openly that Olam Haba is only for Yidden, not for Goy. So what does it mean? How could a guy, he's a ger taishav is a guy, so how could a guy have a chelik in Olam Haba? The Rambam himself says that Olam Haba is only for Yidden. So those were some of the questions. He had other questions too, but the kids, those were the issues that we were dealing with. So what did we say last week? So last week we established, we saw from Rav Hutner and others, that to understand the bedrock of what Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach are fundamentally based on. So what we saw is that when we think about the Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, they're not just. It would be incorrect to think of them as just like 7 individual commandments. Okay, so they can't steal, they can't kill, they can't curse Hashem, they can't eat Eivim Minachai. These are just random things. The rest of your life, just go about your regular day, but just avoid those things. What we saw from Rav Hutner is that it's much deeper than that. The Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, yes, they are 7 individual mitzvahs and 7 individual prohibitions, but what those Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach are trying to create a framework, which is trying to give over the following message, which is that you have a tachlis. You're created for a purpose, and you're not here just to exist. You're here to bring out your kaiches. You're here to improve the world around you, and you're here to produce. Within that frame, and the Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach are then presented to the Goyim that I want you to produce, that I want you to accomplish, I want you to live a fruitful, productive, goal-oriented, tachlis-oriented life within this framework. So your goals in life should not, chas v'shalom, lead to murder or to stealing or to all these things. So those are limitations that are being placed on them to guide them in their general mission, which is to accomplish. And so this is why Rav Hutner said that when the Rebbeinu Shalom brought the Mabul, which was because the Goyim were not keeping Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, it wasn't just a punishment. The Rebbeinu Shalom said, I regret creating them. Because the Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, them abusing the Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, wasn't just abusing those individual commandments. They weren't accepting living a life of purpose. And that's what the generation of the Mabul was. They were just living passively, just enjoying life without feeling compelled to produce anything or to bring out something or to accomplish, to make the world around them better, to create progress in society. It was none of that. Even Noach himself, we didn't speak about this, but Noach himself, why is he called Noach? So it's interesting, right? So the pasuk says Yenachemenu. So it's different interpretations what Yenachemenu means. He'll give us comfort, or he'll give us some menucha, right? So why? So Rashi says from Chazal that Noach created a plow, right? He was one to create a plow to help people, plow the fields and so on. Such an interesting thing. Like that's what Noach is. Noach, you would think the name of a person always is a hint to his Iker Shlichus in the world. The Iker Shlichus of Noach was to make a plow. The Iker Shlichus of Noach is to go through the Mabul and to repopulate the world. The answer is, that's in Chitzonius. In Chitzonius, the world was destroyed, and Noach comes and he survives and he reproduces, and he begins to populate the world again. But in Pnimius, there was a much deeper story that's going on. In Pnimius, the world behind the scenes of the Mabul was a society that was not interested in producing anything. They weren't driven by a task, by purposefulness, by being driven with a sense of responsibility for anything. Noach's survival of the Mabul and repopulating the world isn't just that he repopulates the world. He repopulates the world with this sense of what? Of purpose, of tachlis, of achrayus, of responsibility, of seeing something broken, seeing something not working, and being compelled to fix it. So Noach looks around. How did that express itself? Even in the most basic thing of making a plow. Why did he make a plow? Because he was the most brilliant person in the generation. I mean, I'm sure he was very smart. But Mistam, the reason why he made a plow is because everyone saw a problem. You're plowing with your fingers, but no one had the thought of let me try to improve it. Animals don't try to improve things. The derech klal, the matzah that they're in, that's the matzah that they're in. But the chachma of Noach was what? Is that he embraced fully the framework of the Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, which is the world is not perfect. This is not the way it's supposed to be to plow with your fingers. This is a problem, and once I acknowledge the problem, let me find a solution for it. That's the pnimius of what Noach was about. So that's the Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach. Now from there, based on that idea, we saw that this is where Torah's Moshe, where Yiddishkeit and the Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach do have some sort of common theme. Because this is the fundamentals of Torah too. What's the fundamentals of Torah? The fundamentals of Torah is there are things that are broken in creation and you have to fix them, right? But here's the difference. So Torah's Moshe is also fundamentally built on a sense of achrayus and responsibility and a sense of tikkun. And so too, Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Noach are built on that framework. But the difference is, and this is where we ended off with last week, is that what we're trying to fix in Torah's Moshe and what the Goyim are trying to fix and improve on in Shevis and Inayach are altogether different universes. So so they're both fundamentally about fixing something, that's seeing something broken, deficient, and coming to improve upon it, and bringing out your individual kaiches in that improvement. But what arena are you dealing with? So by Shevis and Inayach, what are they dealing with? This world. We don't have plows, we have to make more plows. The stars out there, the planets out there, we don't know much about them. Let's go discover what they're about. So that's a beautiful thing. That's a chachma. That's a beautiful zach. And the koiches and nefesh that are being brought out in the discovery of more planets and the discovery of better plows, v'chulu. That's what Shem Mitzvah V'neiach are about. So the arena, the atmosphere, the universe that Shem Mitzvah V'neiach, that the goyim are being placed in to fix, to improve, and the koiches and nefesh that are contained within them that they're trying to excavate in that improvement are all of this world. The place that they're fixing is this world. The part of themselves that they're bringing out to fix is of this world. That's the space that they're being Isaac in. But then you have Taras Moshe. And what universes are we being Isaac in? Not much in Asiya. I mean, we live here, and but when we're pushing buttons down here, there's not really what you're being Isaac in. What you're being Isaac in is in the higher world. And the higher world is also a place that's not finished. It's also broken. It's also incomplete. When the Rebbeinu Shalom made the world, this world is incomplete without the human being improving upon it. And the higher world is also incomplete without us improving upon it. So we're all being Isaac in Tikkun. The Goyim are being Isaac in Tikkun of this world, and we're being Isaac in the Tikkun of the higher world. Again, obviously we're involved in this world too, but what we're doing down here is primarily about what it is accomplishing in the higher world. So it's like no different than a person like on his computer pushing buttons. Yes, he's involved in the plastic. You know what I'm saying? But if he were to describe what he's doing while he's working on something, he wouldn't be saying, "I'm pushing plastic." That's not what he's doing. He is pushing plastic buttons. Yes, he's pushing plastic buttons. But what is being the dimension that's being worked on by pushing those plastic buttons is so much more important and so much more real and so much more in the forefront of his mind, that the fact that he's pushing plastic buttons it's keilu he's not. So when you look at a Jew and you ask a Jew, what are you doing when you're putting on tefillin? The answer is not, I'm putting on leather straps or on my own. The answer is, I'm fixing the higher world and I'm fixing the deepest part of my neshama. Yes, the way to do that is by putting leather straps on my arm, just like it is in order to, to control the satellites up there. Someone down here has to press plastic buttons. But if you ask the guy in NASA, what's he doing? He's not going to say, I'm pushing plastic buttons. I'm controlling the satellites, in outer space. Of course, the way to do that is by pushing plastic buttons, but it's b'chlal not what he's being Isaac in. So the Goyim are being Isaac in plastic buttons. And we're being Isaac in the satellites above. That's what's going on. But the tzara shalvish b'neihem, the common theme is that we're both being brought into this world to do something, to accomplish with a sense of responsibility. That's what we saw last week. But now, this week, Bez Hashem, we have to take it to the next level, and we have to more deeply appreciate the unifying force that is between us and the nations of the world. Okay, so let me say it outside, okay? And then we'll see the Marmakamis inside together, because it might be easier to do it like that. Okay, so this is an idea that I've definitely referenced it many, many times, but specifically, for those that maybe have a good memory, that a couple months ago, I think, on a Monday night, I was giving a shir about Eved Canaan, Eved Ivri. So this is a sugya that I spoke about then, so we'll speak about it again. Ein beis medrash b'lo chiddush, but we'll see where it takes us. Okay, so it's taka true. The Goyim are focused on building and fixing and improving this world, and we are focused on building and improving the higher world. But what's interesting is the Rebbeinu Shalom made the world in such a way, like just as I said before, the way in which we are involved in fixing the higher world is by pressing buttons down in this world. Right? That's what's going on. Now in the Surah Hashem, this phenomenon that in order to move the satellite up there, you push plastic buttons down here, right? That in order to improve the higher world above, And in order to discover deeper parts of your own neshama, you have to take something physical, like leather, and wrap it around your hands in the proper way. This is not just a coincidence. This is not just a coincidence. In the Sefer Yehoshua, we're taught that the very tachlis habriya, the very purpose of creation, although it might seem initially, is that there are these two separate arenas. There's the higher world, and then there's the lower world. But the purpose of creation ultimately is for us to be able to not only improve the higher world, and also improve this world as well with the Gaim. The ultimate tachlis is to unify both worlds. That's the tachlis. So Rebbeinu Shalom made heaven, and the Rebbeinu Shalom made the lower worlds. And the Rebbeinu Shalom charged the Goyim with improving the lower world, and he charged the Yidden to improve the higher world. But that's only really the beginning. The tachlis of all tachlisin is not just to improve each space, but to also then unify these two spaces. That a person should be able to be involved, to be a part of this world and experience the higher world through this world. That's the tachlis. This is what Olam Haba is described as. Olam Haba by the Mekubalim is not some higher place. Olam Haba, according to Mekubalim, is planet Earth. It's down here. It's physical life as we experience it, but a physical life that's become completely unified with its higher parallel, where everything in this world is now much more deep, much more three-dimensional. In order for that ultimate purpose to happen, this is why the Rebbeinu Shalom made it that all of the ingredients and all of the mechanisms necessary for us to improve the higher world are actually found in this world. So it's like why is it that the Rebbeinu Shalom decided that to fix the higher world you have to put leather straps on your arm? Like, wouldn't it make more sense that if the environment that we're trying to fix, which is a higher world, the buttons that we should be pushing are made of the higher world? Like, why is it, Taka, that in order to fix the higher world, the ingredients that we're using are made of this world? The answer is because the tachlis is not just to improve the higher world. The tachlis is to unify the lower world with this world. Because of this idea, therefore we find a concept in the Sefer Yehoshua, which is that building on that idea, is that the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't just want a little level of connection between the higher and the lower. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants every single aspect of the higher world to be fully integrated in every single aspect of the lower world. That there shouldn't be any separation at all. That there should be mamish, like we say by Kaddish, the Rebbeinu Shalom's name should be sanctified, la'olam u'l'ol me'al maya, in every single world in an extreme sense. And so here's the idea. Therefore, the responsibility of Torah's Moshe, the objective of Torah's Moshe, which is to fix the higher world, is now more than just to fix the higher world. It's to fix the higher world, is to make that universe of the soul, the universe of Shemayim, fully developed, but at the same time fully developed in such a way that it's also fully integrated with this world, leading to the experience of Olam Haba, where every single piece of this world that you'll come in contact to will be saturated with divinity. That's the purpose. That's the tachlis. And because of this, the level of integration that's wanted by the Rebbeinu Shalom of the higher and lower world is so complete and so full. Therefore, technically speaking, every single part of this world, to the lowest place, has to be involved in somehow or one way or another to be involved in this objective of the Jewish people of improving and connecting to the higher world. Because again, we don't want the asek of the masak in the higher worlds to be disconnected from the lower world. And so the Rebbeinu Shalom said like this: you push buttons down here, and that's how you're going to improve the higher world. And by doing so, not only are you improving the higher world, but you're now connecting that aspect of the physical world that you were just involved in. Because those were the buttons that you were pushing. Now those parts of the world are now able to be integrated with its parallel in the higher world when Mashiach comes and the experience of Olam Haba. But here's the problem. The problem is that as a sensitive Jewish soul, there's only certain, I guess you can say, levels of this world that we can allow ourselves to be involved in with confidence that we won't lose sight of where we come from. So here's the catch-22. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants every single nook and cranny of this world to be used in that divine effort of fixing the higher world. Why? Because the ultimate purpose is that the higher world should not be seen as a separate entity. It should be seen as a completion of this world. And every single aspect of the higher world should be deeply rooted in every single aspect of this world for there to be a full integration. But the problem is that the general mission of what? Of accomplishing this, of fixing the higher world and integrating it with the lower world is on us, is on Yidden. But the problem is, if at the same time every single aspect of this physical world has to be involved with that, the problem is if you find yourself in the lowest pits of this physical world, you're going to forget that there's such a thing as heaven. So what the Rebbeinu Shalom therefore does is an amazing shidduch. The Rebbeinu Shalom makes a shidduch and he tells the Yidden, you have to be involved in this universe, in this physical world, to whatever degree you're allowed to and you're able to push the right buttons to fix the higher world and to integrate the higher world with the lower world. But the problem is that there are caves, subterranean caves of this world, that if you go to those places, and if I engineered Yiddishkeit, says Rabban Shalom, to give you and to compel you to engage in pushing buttons in those subterranean caves, by the time you get into that cave, so to speak, you're going to forget that there's such a place called heaven. But L'maisa, those caves also need to be integrated in the higher world. So what did Rabban Shalom do? So Rabban Shalom made a shidduch between the Goyim and the nation and Klal Yisrael. The Rabban Shalom said like this: what I'm going to do is I'm going to custom make Yiddishkeit in such a way where even when you're staying on the surface, the only way how you're going to be able to use the kalim and push the right buttons on the surface is only because there's someone giving you the ingredients for those buttons, for those things that you're doing on the surface from the subterranean caves. So, Lamashal, you have a guy. So you're a Yid, and you're given this mission of what? Of connecting heaven and earth, and fixing the higher world, and integrating the higher with the lower world. And the button that you were given to push, the activity that you were given to do, is to take leather straps and wrap it around your arm, and that's how you're going to do it. But guess what? The leather straps didn't come from nowhere. The leather straps comes from a cow. Comes from a cow. Now you're not a farmer, so you have but in order for you to be given a pair of tefillin, what do you have to have now? A lot of achanas. You have to have someone who's a farmer. Not only do you have to have a farmer person, you have to have someone who is his whole life's purpose and his whole life's involvement is what? Is making food for cows. And not only that, and then you have to have a whole industry that's called, what's animal doctors? What are they called? Veterinarians. A whole ASIC over there, and you need a whole section of humanity focused on what? On developing medicines for animals. V'chulu, v'chulu, v'chulu. Now, if the Rabban, and why is that? Because the Rabban Shalom wants every single nook and cranny of this world to somehow, in some way, be involved in that cosmic effort of the Jewish people to connect this world to the lower world. But if the Rabban Shalom said that it not just wrapping, I want you to, and it goes like this, and the Rabban Shalom wants every single piece of disgusting, dirty corn that's on the that's full of mud. And who knows whatever else it's full of on the farm floor. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants that also to be involved in the mitzvah of putting on tefillin. But the Rebbeinu Shalom had rachmanis on us and said, if I tell you to mamish go to the muck and the dirt over there and to be involved in every single piece of corn, then you're going to forget that there's such a thing as heaven. You're going to become completely magush and physical people. The Rebbeinu Shalom said, therefore, here's the eitzah. You make a shidduch. I'm going to have people being Isaac in the lowest places. And those people that are being Isaac in the lowest places, and they're not as sensitive as you, the nations of the world, their souls are not as sensitive. They are able to go to those low places and handle it without it becoming too spiritually traumatic. So they, because of their lack of sensitivity, they can handle those low places, those subterranean levels. But the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to make the world in such a way that the only way how you can be involved in what you're being involved in the higher levels is because there's someone in the subterranean plane moving things up the food chain and up the ladder of physicality. And by the time you get that pair of tefillin, that's not just a pair of tefillin. That's a pair of tefillin that has within it the investment of thousands and millions of people, all leading up and all investing their energies in one way or another, leading to you being able to have the opportunity to take the pair of tefillin and put it on your arm. So it's like passing the baton, So you have the first person who has the baton, and then he passes the baton to the next guy, to the next guy, to the next guy. So you have a person from, again, the system is completely complicated because of this, completely, infinitely complex. We have there's a certain, here put it this way, there's a certain cutoff point, there's a certain demarcation point in this physical world where beneath that line, the Jewish soul is too sensitive to be able to deal with. And if the Jewish soul is involved with those things, and again, I don't mean certain parnassus, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about certain, the lashon in the Smart Lashon, the language is certain sparks of kedusha. If the Jewish soul would be charged with trying to harness certain sparks of kedusha that exist in certain layers of this world, it will be completely overwhelming to our sensitivities. We couldn't handle it. We could only handle a certain strata of reality and the sparks of kedusha that are contained in that strata. And so, but nevertheless, everything below that line also needs to be elevated. So this is where the Rebbeinu Shalom made the shidduch. The goyim are involved in things that are beneath that line, and by them doing what they have to do, by making society function and making society a better place, then we experience that better world that they're building, and then when we do our things, we are then taking the baton from them, all those sparks of kedusha, all those sparks of divinity that they are able to deal with, despite the fact that it's on such a low level, because their lack of spiritual sensitivity, they could be involved in those low places. So they are the ones to actually, rescue or elevate sparks of kedusha in very, very low places. And then those sparks of kedusha are then passed over to the Jewish people, who are then holding on a higher spiritual plane. And then when we perform the 613 mitzvahs that we're able to do, then we're doing them not only involving ourselves with the sparks of kedusha contained in the strata of physicality that we're involved in those mitzvahs, but those mitzvahs themselves are facilitated by all the thousands and millions of goyim that allow those things to take place as well. And so when you put on that tefillin, that pair of tefillin, you're not just elevating a spark of that pair of tefillin, thus fixing a higher part of the world and integrating the higher world with that particular corner of this world called the pair of tefillin. That pair of tefillin contains within it its own individual spark that's already considered to be on a higher plane, but it also contains within it a spark of that of everything that went into that pair of tefillin, namely all the thousands and millions of things involved to lead to that thing. So, for example, there's sparks of kedusha. Everything has to be elevated, including pig, chazer, and shrimp, and all non-kosher food. So how do we do that? We're not allowed to go to those places. The spark of kedusha that's contained in shrimp and that's contained in chazer, it has to be elevated. It has to also be integrated and somehow brought to be part of this big mosaic of this world and the higher world. But the problem is that space that's called shrimp and that thing that's called chazer, the Jewish soul is too sensitive to go into that place. So but Lamaisa, the spark in that food also has to be elevated. So what do the Rebbeinu Shalom do? So Rebbeinu Shalom says, okay, goyim can eat shrimp and goyim can eat chazer, and they take that energy and then they pave the highway, right? Or they do something more sophisticated. They work in economics and make the economical system of America functional. Whatever it is that they're doing because of the energy that they have in their bodies because of eating shrimp and chazer. And then a Jew drives on the highway to go to daven. So when the Jew is driving on the highway to go daven, what spark is he elevating? What part of this world is he raising up to Hashem? So certainly he's part of what he's doing is raising up his car. He's raising up the clothing that he's wearing. He's raising up the highway that he's driving on, because this is all part of this the avoid of the Jew going to daven and pushing the right, and those are all buttons that he's pressing down here to fix the higher world and to integrate the higher world lower. But guess what? Contained in that highway is also the energy that the workers were using to make that highway, and that energy was coming from shrimp and chazer. So whether the Jew realizes it or not, while he's driving on the highway to go to shul, not only is he elevating the highway, he's also elevating shrimp and chazer, but indirectly now, in a way that there's no damage that's done, in a way that's not too traumatic for the Jewish soul. If the Jewish soul were to directly try to elevate chazer or shrimp, chas v'shalom, that would be extremely damaging and extremely traumatic for the Jewish neshama. So Rebbeinu Shalom makes this shidduch. Goyim, you eat chazer, you eat shrimp, and you make this world a better place. You improve this world. You build highways and bridges and infrastructures, satellites. You do all of that stuff. And in that environment that you're creating, I'm going to give the Yidden 613 things to do also in that space of this world. And they're going to be, by doing those things, they're going to be elevating this world. They're going to be fixing the higher world and integrating the higher world with the lower world. But when they're involved in those things, they're not just pushing those particular 613 buttons. They're elevating all the things that were necessary to give a framework for them to do those 613 things. And so everything is being elevated. Things are being elevated directly by the Jewish people through the 613 mitzvahs and everything that's necessary for that, or indirectly through the nations of the world, improving the world and allowing us to then carry that baton. So it's like imagine like the baton is like that spark of divinity, that piece of chazer and shrimp, which is waiting to be integrated with the higher world. But where that baton is found in its original state, in a piece of chazer and a piece of shrimp, a Jewish soul can't go there. But what you have a guy that can. So a guy goes, but on the flip side, a guy can't reach the higher world. So this is why you have passed the baton. So the guy is able to unleash the energy and the spark of kaiches that is contained in a piece of chazer and shrimp, but he can't reach the higher world. So what does he do? He passes it to a Jew. And what does it mean to pass it to a Jew? It means that he takes the energy and he makes a highway. And he takes that energy and he's a good farmer and he allows cows to live properly. And then in some way, the cow becomes kosher meat, or the cow becomes a pair of tefillin, or a mezuzah or something, or the highway is used for Yidden to do mitzvahs, or the Goyim discover some planet out there somewhere, and a Yid reads about it in the newspaper, and he's like, wow, Marav Masach Hashem. So that moment, there was a passing of the baton. The Goyim, millions and millions of data is being collected and trained and being programmed and being orchestrated to allow them to discover something new in outer space. And all that involvement is them on their level sort of releasing and taking that baton that's called that new part of the world that's being unpackaged by them. And then they carry that, but that also has to be integrated into the higher world. How so? So they can't reach to the higher world, but what they can do is take that baton that they just discovered and pass it over to a Yid. And that Yid then takes that discovery of this new planet out there who knows what, and the Jew says, wow, Marav Masach Hashem, and then fulfills a mitzvah that's called Yiras Hashem and Ahavas Hashem, being overwhelmed by Hashem's beauty and glory of the world and being dispelled from Hashem's creations. That's a mitzvah. That's called Yiras Hashem. That's called Ahavas Hashem. And then all of a sudden, the Jew thinks that all he's doing is connecting that experience of that moment, the emotions that he just felt. Okay, that's the button that he's pushing. But contained in that button is also the thousands of employees in NASA and all of the food that they ate and all of the teachers that taught them and all the food that the teachers ate. V'chulu, v'chulu, v'chulu. Those are all the batons that are contained in that moment that's being presented to the Jew of look at God's creations and stay in wonderment and fulfill the mitzvah of fearing Hashem. And at that moment, when the Jew fulfills that mitzvah, he's not just taking one baton that's called Yiras Hashem and bringing it to heaven. That baton contains within it myriads of batons. And this is ultimately the shidduch that the Rebbeinu Shalom makes between the Goyim and the Jewish people. So until now, from last week we saw is okay, Goyim are involved in improving the world, and we're involved in improving the world. But they're involved in improving this world, and we're involved in improving the higher world. So that's a similarity, but it's not fully integrated. What we're saying now is that no, not only is that true, but we're actually partners in some bigger effort. Because the tachlis is not that there should just be a world that's physically improved, and there's a higher world that's also Gevaldik. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants there to be an integration between the higher world and the lower world. And for that to happen, you have this catch-22. You need to have people down here involved in the physical world, connecting it to the higher world. But those people, namely the Jewish people, are too sensitive to deal with chazer and shrimp. And if we try to, again, connect chazer and shrimp directly to the higher world, our neshamas can't handle that experience. But yet, chazer and shrimp is part of the world. It also needs to be integrated. So this is where the partnership between us and the Umas Olam come into place. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, Goyim, I want you to be involved in every nook and cranny of this world. But don't just think of it as improving this world for this world's sake. What you're doing is you're unpackaging, you're discovering, you're improving this world. And by doing so, you certainly are making this world a better place to live. But you're also releasing all these batons. You're also accessing all these sparks, so to speak, of divine energy and of divine wisdom. And you might not be able, says Hashem to the Goyim, to directly take those batons and bring them to heaven. That's where you need the Jewish people. And the Jewish people, the Rebbeinu Shalom turns to them and says, listen, you have the ability of taking batons of this world and bringing it to heaven, but you can't go to those lower places, that's called chazer and shrimp, because it'll be too destructive for you. So this is what the Rebbeinu Shalom does. He makes a shidduch. Goyim, you take the batons from chazer and shrimp, you pass it to the Yidden, and the Yidden take those batons that have to do with chazer and shrimp, but now they're integrated in mitzvahs that we can handle spiritually, mitzvahs that are comfortable for our neshama, and now we can take all of that, those batons that by the Yidden that are directly relevant to 613 mitzvahs, and batons that are indirectly relevant to 613 mitzvahs. So in other words, when the Yid is driving on the highway, the batons the sparks that he's connecting to Hashem are in two dimensions. There are sparks that he's dealing with that are directly being released through his involvement of mitzvahs, which is namely the car that he's driving, the highway that he's driving on, the energy that he's using of his kosher food, all for the purposes of davening. Those are all, every single one of those things. There's sparks that are being released and buttons being pushed to integrate this world and the next world. And at the same time, there's also sparks that he's involved in and batons that he's carrying that are indirectly related to his mitzvah, which is namely all the food that the Goyim ate to give them the energy to build that highway. And all of that is coming together. This is the side of what the Rambam was telling us, that there's such a thing as a guy that kishav mitzvah gevaldik, and that means that he fully embraces his responsibility to make this world a better place, and that's it. But then there's such a thing as a ger taishav. What's a ger taishav? A ger taishav is a guy that also accepts his responsibility to mitzvah but doesn't just accept his responsibility to make this world a better place for this world's sake. It's to make this world a better place, to allow all the parts of this world to then be integrated in the Jewish people's involvement of connecting this world to the higher world. Now, just the Jewish people cannot go to such a low place that the Goyim can, so they have to go to that lower place. They find some things in the basement, and they pass it along to the higher floors, to the Yidden. And then by us, we can pass it up to heaven. This is the side of what it means to be a ger taishav. It means that you're accepting the Shem Mitzvah, but you're accepting it by knowing that it was transmitted to you through Moshe Rabbeinu. That in halacha, that's what's being expressed over here, is that this integration is that you're involved in your things that you're involved in, but understand that what you're doing is not just improving this world, you're also passing the baton of everything that you're being Isaac in. You're passing that baton to the Jewish people, and then the Jewish people take everything that you just did and bring it to heaven. And then indirectly, you are involved in the same effort that the Jewish people are involved in. So in other words, are the non-Jewish world involved in the same objective and the same effort that we're involved in, namely fixing the higher world and integrating the higher world with the lower world? The answer is yes, but indirectly. Yes, but indirectly. A guy that does not become a ger taishav, that does not formally accept upon himself the Shem Mitzvah in this way, then he's not engaging. He's not consciously allowing himself to embrace this idea of being involved in the Jewish people's avodah, of connecting the higher world to the lower world, albeit indirectly. The chiddush of a ger taishav is that he formally accepts upon himself this mindset of the Shem Mitzvah. This is why the Rambam said that if a guy keeps the Shem Mitzvah in this way of a ger taishav, he has olam haba. Olam Haba is only for Yidden. The answer is, the whole definition of a Ger Toshav is that he's involved, he's a guy, and he's involved with the things that he has to be involved in Shevet Zunei Noach, but indirectly he's involved in Avodas Yisrael. So Olam Haba is something that's only for people that were involved in Avodas Hashem of Taras Moshe. But that's what a Ger Toshav is. A Ger Toshav is putting himself in the asek of Avodas Yisrael, albeit indirectly. So indirectly he has Olam Haba. Huh?
That little entices them to Olam Haba.
That entices them to Olam Haba because Olam Haba, like you have to, when you get to Olam Haba, you have to show a card that you spent your life involved in Avodas Yisrael. You have to. That's the box that you have to check. So Yidden, obviously we're Yidden and we're involved in Avodas Hashem. That's called Avodas Yisrael. That's the Avodah of Taras Moshe. But if a guy is just being Isaac and Shevet Zunei Noach just to make this world better and that's it, then that's also, he's not involved in Avodas Yisrael, at least not consciously. But when a guy goes and he becomes a Ger Toshav, he says, listen, I'll be involved in my world and improving this world, and I'm going to discover planets, and I'm going to make good highways, and I'm going to be a good father, and I'm going to be a good mother, and I'm going to be a good friend and a good neighbor, and I'm not going to slash anyone's tires, and I'm going to do all nice things to create a society that's functional, that allows Yidden to then take all these things that we bring to the table, and to take all of that and then to bring it to heaven. Then that means that they're involved in this relay race of passing the baton over to eventually the Yid, and that means that they're involved. So when the gold medal is given by a relay race, right? They have that by the Olympics, right? So when the gold medal is given, it's not just to the last person that carries the baton over to the end. The whole team is given the gold medal. Who crossed the finish line? Yeah, only the last person crossed the finish line, but that person was carrying the baton that started off in the first person. So the gold medal is given to the whole team. Now, in this context, the whole team means the Jewish people and the nations of the world. But certainly, if it wasn't for this is where the mashal of the baton of the relay race and the Jewish people and the Goyim, the mashal doesn't really work so much, because by the relay race, okay, listen, maybe there's a chachma, I guess, in terms of figuring out who should be the first runner and who should be the last runner. But there's really no difference between like the first, they're both just running a certain distance. It's just a matter of beginning of the race, end of the race. In the Nimshal, with the Jewish people, the nations of the world, they're different avodas. There's certainly different avodas, but there is a big picture of what's going on. And if it wasn't for the Jewish people, none of this would have been possible. If it wasn't for the Jewish people, then the Goyim would just have this world to deal with, and there'll be nothing else. So when you have the Jewish people in place, and now you have a much deeper, a much broader mission, now there's room to incorporate the nations of the world in that mission. And Adrabah, we need them. Mamash need them. And that's what Shev Mitzvah Bnei Noach are about. That's what the Rambam was trying to convey, is that there's such a thing as Shev Mitzvah Bnei Noach just on its own, just fixing this world. And even that has a connection to our world, which is we're also trying to fix things, but we're not trying to fix the same things. Then you have this musig of a Ger Toshav, but no. What we're trying to do, which is to unify this world and the next world, we need them. But we mamish need them, because we can't go to those places called Chazer and Shrimp. And we need their help to do that. So they're involved in their arenas that they're able to handle due to the lack of sensitivity. It's like in a human body. We'll see in a second. It's like the head needs the feet. But you can't walk on your head because your head is too sensitive. And you couldn't, maybe, there's people that could walk on their hands, you know what I mean? But you don't walk like that all day long, because the hands are not made for being on the floor. Your feet are able to be on the floor. They're callous enough that they can handle being stepped on all day. So, but they're still part of the bigger picture of the human being. So you have certain neshamas called the Jewish people that we're very spiritually sensitive, and we can't be forced to be on the bottom, throughout our lives. And eating chazer and eating shrimp, that's called being on the bottom. That's called being on the bottom. So the Rebbeinu Shalom needs, those things to be elevated too. So Hashem makes feet. And that's called the nations of the world. But it's all part of one big picture. The kitzur, that's the aside. Let's see some of the Ramaklamis inside. Again, it's a lot already, but we'll see.
Does intermarriage come to play here?
That's a terrible churban, because L'maisa, at the end of the day, that it's a yid going into a place that is spiritually destructive for him. So it doesn't help this at all, because again, it's like a Jew trying to say, okay, I'm going to go eat chazer, I'll go eat shrimp, and I'll take that energy and I'll then use it to daven. That energy is not going to work. It's not going to work. I mean, physically, you might have the energy to then go daven, but in terms of what's going on in the dimensions of the neshama, that energy that the person has by eating chazer and shrimp is so locked up in tumma and in klipa that it itself is destructive to the neshama. So it is true that everything has to be elevated, but the very nature of the Jewish neshama is such is that there are certain places that we're just too sensitive to go to. And if we go to those places, it's self-destructive. Not only do we can't integrate those things to a higher place, we ourselves become destroyed by it. So the guy needs to go from point A to point B, and instead of walking on his hands, he walks on his feet. Guess what? He's not going to get there, and not only is he not going to get there because he doesn't have the stamina to walk on his hands so far, because that's not what the hands are created for. Halfway there, his hands are going to become bloodied and with rocks and who knows whatever pebbles. So it's just not possible. So for a Jewish neshama to go to a dark place like that, yes, even those dark places have to be elevated, but that's not. We can't do it. It would not be possible. It wouldn't be. It's not even a matter of listen, if we could, it can't be done. The Jewish neshama is just too sensitive. It can't go to that place. It just can't go to that place. It's like, imagine, like, even a hand is not a good muscle. Imagine your hands were as sensitive as your eyes. So can you imagine walking on your hands? You couldn't do it. That's the experience of a Jewish neshama going to those places. You can't do it. You just can't do it. So take a look at some of the Marmakainis. Okay, we'll see what we can do over here. We'll try to go quick. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit outside. So Marmukah number 1, you'll see it inside yourselves, but Marmukah number 1, this is a piece from the Leshem. The Leshem, this is in Sefer Klalim, Klal Tesvav, Oisir Aleph. The Leshem over here is talking about a very interesting machlokes. In the Rishonim, we find a machlokes between the Rambam and Rameir Gabai. These were two different schools of philosophy. And the machlokes between the Rambam and Rameir Gabai was, when the Rebbeinu Shalom made the world, is everything in this world made for one particular tachlis, and ultimately all leading to this one goal? Or is there such a thing that the Rebbeinu Shalom has different purposes for different things in the world? It's a philosophical question that the Rambam dealt with, the Rameir Gabai deals with. And so one was of the opinion that no, despite the fact that there's so many different levels to creation and levels to society and all different types of people, it's all ultimately for one purpose. Whereas the other school of thought was, no, the Jewish people have their purpose, and the Goyim have their purpose, and butterflies have their purpose, and everything has its own individual tachlis. And as Yidden, we're focused on our tachlis, but butterflies should be focused on their purpose. Or is there one purpose for everything? That was the disagreement. For a long time, this is a machlokes. Comes a Leshem and says, well, from the eyes of Pneumius Satira, they're both 100% true. They're both true. It's exactly what we're talking about. Is that, yes, when you think of it very, when you're just focused on, okay, what are you doing, and what is your purpose in terms of what arena, what part of God's creation are you here to improve upon? Then yeah, butterflies have their place, and gorillas have their place, and Yidden have their place, and the nation of the world have their place. And every single part of creation is also charged with this mission of bringing kaiches out, of doing something, of accomplishing something, and everything is trying to accomplish different stratas and different spaces and different layers. But then, if you think about it, okay, but now big picture, from the lens of the Jewish people's purpose, which is to then take all of this world and to integrate it with the higher world. So now it's true, butterflies are not involved in that effort directly, and Goyim are not involved in that effort directly. The only people that are involved in that effort directly are the Jewish people. But what we're bringing to the higher world is indirectly everything that is being brought to us by the butterflies and and every single part of this world. So because we know from science, right, that if there, the entire ecosystem is all interconnected with each other, which means that any time that you eat a kosher piece of food and you make a bracha on that piece of food is coming from an ecosystem that also contains butterflies and alligators. So you're not eating a butterfly, you're not eating the alligator. But what you're eating is part of that universe that's sustained and maintained and functional because of such a thing as butterflies and alligators. So it means that when you're eating that piece of food, what you're directly bringing to heaven is that piece of food because of the bracha that you're making. But indirectly, what you're bringing to heaven is everything that was allowing this experience to take place. Alligators and butterflies, and the farmers, and the chulu, and a whole history of thousands of years leading to this moment. So on the one hand, when you look at it very more narrow in terms of what your job is, what my job is, the alligator has one job, the butterfly has another job, the goyim have one job, we have another job. But in terms of what is accomplished at the end of the day, we all have one tachlis, which is to somehow get this world connected to the higher world, either directly or indirectly. And this is what the Leshem says, this is the yichud between these two shittas. They're both true. They're both true. Everything has its own individual purpose, and yet we all share a common purpose ultimately. We're all in that relay race, just passing the baton ultimately to the forefront. That's the Avodah. Now, you'll take a look, you'll see that that's the first Marmakim. It's not hard reading. You're able to read it yourself. But just to end off, Marmakim number 2, this is a piece that I quoted about a month ago or 2 months ago in that shir about Eved Ivri, but it's Kedai Techazer. It's everything we're talking about. So in Marmakim number 2, this is a piece from a sefer called Kerem Shloima. Kerem Shloima, one of the great Sardish Mekubalim in the early late 1800s. So he writes the following thing, and it's everything we've been talking about. He says like this: Ki ikar ma'is tzadikim hu yadu bar lakol. The main effort that the tzadikim are involved in. When he says tzadikim over here, he's referring to tzadikim, but also the Jewish people, amich kol and tzadikim. So he says the effort, the tachlis, the goal of what the tzadikim are here for is understood. Everyone knows what we're here for. Kimasayim hein lovar hatoiv shakdusha mitoich haklipa. Our job is to find that spark of Hashem, to take ingredients of this world and to bring it to holiness. To deal with push buttons in this world and to somehow use ingredients of this world and to elevate them and to reconnect them to the higher world. That's what we're here for. But he says like this: for kolzeh, so our direct involvement in this activity is aday tfilasam, v'lima tayrasam, u'mitzvah achilasam, is through the 613, learning, davening, keeping mitzvahs, eating in the right way. So all the things, all the activities that are required of a Jew to fulfill the 613 mitzvahs, which are all physical activities and all require some level of involvement in this physical world, those are all the pieces of this world that you are directly linking above. But in order to allow a person to fulfill the 613 mitzvahs, so it's not just, so in order to fulfill, there's a mitzvah called davening. Yeah, so for davening it means that you need a shul. Well, to have a shul, already it means that you have very nice Jerusalem stone in the back. Well, in order to have that stone, you need people working in caves and mines, hewing rock out of mountains. So that means they're also involved in this. They're also part of the shul. So when you come to daven over here, what aspect of this physical world are you raising up to heaven? Yeah, so you're raising up this physical building and the food that you ate in breakfast, or maybe you should eat before davening, but whatever, the things that you eat in order to give you the energy to daven. So fine, so that's what you're raising. But you know what you're also raising? You're also raising the food that the miner also ate before he hewed out those rocks. And you're also elevating the food that the teacher of the engineer that built the building, he went to school. And his teachers ate breakfast before they came to class. All that stuff you're elevating, just indirectly. This is what he says. In order to allow the 613 mitzvahs to be fulfilled, you need a lot of help. You can't just do it by yourself. You need a lot of gaboyim. You don't need a lot of people helping you. Where does the food come from? Who's plowing? Zareya, who's planting? Kaitzer, who's harvesting? Who's making the food? Who's creating stores to allow to sell the food? And all these things. You have the money to buy things. You need money to pay the electric bill of the shul. Well, where does like in those days there was actual money. So like where'd the metal come from to have the coins to pay the bills from? So there's countless layers of involvement in order to allow a Jew to do a mitzvah. Who's making the clothing that you're wearing? This is a lot of energy to do all these things. And if the Rebbeinu Shalom told it, you can imagine, if the Rebbeinu Shalom has Rachmanis on us, so he said, Yidden, you're charged with bringing the entire world up to heaven. And you have to do it yourself. So can you imagine? So it means that we would have to do everything. there's a lot, and the things that and certain things will be too overwhelming to our sensitive neshamas. This is what he says. Habir Shalhem, all those things also have to be elevated. Is Aideshe Me'ilim Umahanim Latzadikim L'Yisrael. And all that elevation takes place indirectly because of all the non-Jews that are involved in these efforts. Through the benefit that the tzaddikim, the Jewish people, have from all of these energies, from all these involvements. Through all these things, we're able to do the mitzvah properly. And we elevate and we do the avodah that we have to do. Through their involvement. There's obviously many layers to this. Some indirectly, some indirectly, all over the place. And now he ends off just one last thing. He says, not only is this true for people, this is even true for animals. Everything is involved in the higher world. He says, Kilatam, that because of this, I mentioned this last time. The Harizal was makbid. He never killed it. He never was makbid to try at least never to kill an animal, even a mosquito. I think if you kill a mosquito or a gnat or a fly or a bee, whatever. The Harizal was makbid not to kill anything. Why? Because he would say, I feel even things that were biting him, like a mosquito or something. Then he would say, listen, they're doing their shlichus. They're doing what God created. The Rabbanish, for whatever reason, the Rabbanish wants me to, send the mosquito to make mosquito bites. Okay. Doesn't mean I'm gonna go outside in the swamp, take my shirt off and say, here, free meal. I'm not gonna do that. But it means that I'm not just gonna kill a bug. I'm not just going to do that. Just stop because or there's stories of tzaddikim. There's a Maisa that I think it was. I'm afraid to say who it was in case I'm wrong. But one of the Talmidim or a colleague of Rav Kook was walking with Rav Kook talking. It was during the week, it wasn't on Shabbos. They're talking and learning, and as they're walking down, so this tzaddik in his own right, but he ripped off a leaf from a tree. He was just he's playing with it. People do that. And Rav Kook looked at me. What are you doing? So it's like he didn't even know what he was like a second thing, like a hat. You ripped off a leaf. The Rebbeinu Shalom created that leaf. The leaf is accomplishing something by being in existence. You're ripping it off for no reason. This is the thing. Now, that doesn't mean so you take that to the farthest extreme. So you have philosophy like Native American philosophy, which is the world is holy by itself and should not be touched. That's also incorrect. Everything has to be improved upon. Everything has to be developed. But with a tachlis, with a goal. So in other words, if the Arizal is sitting and learning, and that's his ikar tachlis, and there's a fly, flying around his head, distracting him from learning, stam, that fly he would take care of. He would get rid of that fly. But stam, when you're walking down the street and there's just a bug on the floor, and let me kill it for what? Stam, the bug is supposed to do. It has its shlichus. What are you interrupting for? What are you stopping it for? So again, it doesn't mean not to be complete. We don't believe in that philosophy of being passive and allowing the world to be adrabah. The whole tachlis of what we've been learning, Shevis Bnei Noach and Klal Yisrael, is to improve and to build and to but understanding that everything is also doing that. It's just that there are primary. There's everything is passing the baton to everything else. But the only way how we can pass the baton up all the way to heaven is because there's all these layers beneath us. Everything is created with tzarech kavaya. That's the tachlis. So we should be zeicha to fulfill our mission properly amongst all the nations of the world. Tachlis abriyat. We should be able to experience that elokus. V'yas kol tzedek. Amen.